I turned 18 on a Tuesday. There was no party, no cake, no candles, just a quiet dinner at the kitchen table in our house in Rivern, the kind of evening where everything feels slightly off even though nothing is openly wrong. My parents barely spoke, exchanging glances like they were waiting for something to happen. The mashed potatoes were cold. The chicken was dry. I pushed my food around my plate, half expecting someone to suddenly smile and say this was all a joke, that there was a surprise waiting. There wasn't. After dinner, my mother cleared her throat. "Daniel, can you come sit in the living room? We need to talk." My father was already there, sitting in his recliner with his arms crossed. The look on his face, serious, rehearsed, made my stomach tighten. For a brief moment, I wondered if this was it. Maybe they were finally going to say they were proud of me. I had decent grades. I worked part-time. I'd even been accepted to a state university with partial financial aid. I sat down across from them. "We just want to be honest with you," my mother began. Her voice was calm, almost scripted. "We never really saved anything for your college." I blinked, trying to process the words. Before I could respond, my father leaned forward. "It's not that we didn't want to," he said. "We just didn't think you'd actually go, or amount to much." The sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. My mother offered a small, uncomfortable smile. "You were always a little unfocused," she added gently. "Not like Marcus." Marcus. My younger brother. From the moment he was born, everything revolved around his potential. Tutors, sports camps, constant praise. They talked about his future like it was guaranteed. Mine was always treated like a question mark. They loved us both, I believe that now, but belief and love are not the same thing. When Marcus turned 16, they threw him a surprise party and bought him a car. When I turned 18, I got a pair of socks and a keychain that said "Go get 'em." That night, I thanked them for their honesty and went to my room. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, realizing something that would quietly shape the next decade of my life. My parents had already decided who I was, long before I ever had the chance to decide for myself. That was the night I stopped expecting support. And the night I started planning how to leave. The first year at Northlake University nearly broke me. I wish I could say I walked onto campus confident, ready to prove everyone wrong, but the truth is I felt small from the moment I arrived. Everyone else seemed to know exactly where they were going. They talked about internships their parents helped them land, about professors they already knew by name, about plans that stretched 5-10 years into the future. I was just trying to survive the week. I worked mornings at a campus cafe and evenings shelving books at the library. Between classes, I studied wherever there was an open chair. I learned quickly how to sleep in 20-minute intervals and how to ignore hunger when my paycheck didn't quite stretch far enough. I didn't tell my parents how hard it was. Every time I called home, the conversations were short and shallow. "So, class is going okay?" my dad would ask. "Yeah," I'd say. And that was it. They never asked what I was studying or how I was managing. They never asked if I needed help. I stopped expecting them to. Midway through the semester, I nearly failed my first major exam. I sat on the floor of my dorm room afterward, staring at the paper, convinced that this was the moment everyone had predicted, the proof that they were right about me all along. That night, I considered quitting. Instead, the next morning, I walked into office hours for a class I was barely passing. The room was almost empty. Dr. Elaine Brooks looked up from her desk and asked me to sit. "You look exhausted," she said. I laughed because it was either that or cry. I told her everything, not dramatically, not emotionally, just the facts. The jobs. The pressure. The feeling that I was constantly one step behind everyone else. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "Daniel, you're not behind. You're carrying more. That sentence changed something in me. She helped me restructure my schedule, connected me with a small academic grant I didn't know existed, and most importantly, treated me like someone worth investing in. For the first time, an adult in my life wasn't managing expectations downward. By the end of the year, my grades improved. Not perfect, but solid. Enough to stay. Enough to breathe. At home, things didn't change. My brother Marcus visited campus once with our parents. They toured buildings, took photos, asked him questions about what he might want to study when his time comes. No one asked me anything. That night, Marcus told me quietly, "They just worry about you." I didn't answer because I finally understood something he didn't. They didn't worry, they assumed. By my third year at Northlake University, something had shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough that I could feel it. I was no longer just surviving. I knew which buildings stayed open late, which professors actually cared, which corners of campus were quiet enough to think. I still worked 2 jobs, but I had learned how to move through exhaustion without letting it swallow me whole. That was the year Dr. Brooks asked me a question that caught me completely off guard. "Have you ever thought about leadership?" she asked. I almost laughed. Leadership wasn't something people associated with me. I wasn't loud. I didn't dominate rooms. I didn't come from money or connections. But she wasn't talking about titles. She was talking about responsibility. She invited me to help pilot a small mentoring initiative for first-generation students. At first, it was informal. A few study sessions. One-on-one check-ins. Quiet conversations after class where students admitted they felt like they didn't belong. Every story sounded familiar. We formalized the program the following semester and named it Equity Path. There were no banners, no social media announcements. Just a growing list of students who stayed instead of dropping out. That was also the year Northlake announced a student leadership panel for incoming freshmen and their families. The topic was resilience, academic pressure, and navigating university without a safety net. Dr. Brooks encouraged me to apply as a speaker. I didn't want to. Standing on a stage, telling my story, felt dangerous, like exposing something I'd spent years keeping quiet. But she looked at me and said, "Daniel, if you don't tell this story, someone else will tell it wrong." So I applied. When I received the confirmation email, my hands shook. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Marcus. I told myself it didn't matter who showed up, that I was doing it for the students who needed to hear it. The auditorium. I stood behind the curtain listening to the muffled crowd, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure the microphone would pick it up. When my name was called, I stepped into the light and forced myself to breathe. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't dramatize. I talked about being overlooked, about being labeled realistic instead of capable, about working twice as hard just to be seen as average. I talked about the night I almost quit, about the professor who told me I wasn't behind, just carrying more. I watched faces change as I spoke. Parents grew quiet. Students leaned forward. When I finished, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was steady. Real. After the panel, students approached me in clusters. Some just said thank you. Others told me things they hadn't told anyone before. One mother hugged me and whispered, "My son thinks he's failing. You just gave him hope." That was when I saw Marcus. He stood near the back of the auditorium, arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't come over. He didn't smile. He left before the crowd fully cleared. I didn't chase him. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't speaking to be understood by my family. I was speaking for myself. The reception was held later that afternoon in the East Wing of Northlake's main hall. It was invitation only for academic honorees, student leaders, and their families. The kind of event my parents had always imagined attending for Marcus one day, not for me. I arrived early, mostly out of habit. Years of working jobs that punished lateness had trained that into me. I adjusted my jacket, checked the program on the table near the entrance, and scanned the room. My name was there. Not buried. Not small. Printed clearly under student leadership and academic excellence. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt strangely calm. Dr. Brooks arrived a few minutes later. She smiled when she saw me, the kind of smile that said, "You earned this." She introduced me to faculty members who knew my work, who spoke to me as a peer. For a moment, I allowed myself to stand in it, not pride, exactly, but validation. Then my parents walked in. They hesitated at the entrance, scanning the room like they weren't sure they belonged. My mother spotted me first. Her smile appeared quickly, practiced, the same one she used at family gatherings. "There you are," she said, as if we'd simply been separated in a grocery. My dad nodded. Nice turnout. They hadn't seen the program yet. We exchanged small talk. Weather. Parking. Nothing real. Then the lights dimmed slightly, and a large screen at the front of the hall came to life. A slideshow began cycling through featured students. Names. Photos. Achievements. When my slide appeared, the room went quiet, at least for me. Daniel Harper. Research Fellow. Co-founder, Equity Path. Academic Excellence Award recipient. Invited speaker, orientation panel. I didn't look at my parents right away. I didn't need to. I could feel the shift. My mother read it twice. My father cleared his throat. Neither of them said anything. Later, as people circulated, a faculty member stopped to congratulate me. Another asked about expanding Equity Path next year. Someone mentioned a local publication that wanted to feature student-led initiatives. My parents stood just behind me listening. Absorbing. For years, they'd spoken about me as if I weren't there, cautious, dismissive, resigned. Now, they were hearing strangers speak to me with respect. It unsettled them. As the event wound down, my mom touched my arm. "We didn't realize you were doing all this," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. She waited, maybe expecting reassurance. I didn't give it. That evening, a short article went live on a local education site. It included a photo from the panel and a quote from my speech about resilience and invisible pressure. The next morning, Marcus texted me. "You didn't have to make it public." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I didn't make it about anyone but myself. He never replied. Graduation came quietly. No dramatic speeches. No cinematic moment where everything suddenly made sense. Just a long line of students in identical gowns, waiting their turn to walk across a stage that had taken years to reach. When my name was called, I heard applause, polite, steady, real. I shook hands, accepted the diploma, and kept walking. For the first time, I didn't look toward the audience to see if my parents were watching. It didn't matter. After the ceremony, my phone buzzed with messages from classmates, from students in Equity Path, from Dr. Brooks. A few hours later, my parents called. I didn't answer. That night, I packed my apartment. The walls were bare. The floor was scuffed. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I folded my gown carefully and placed it at the bottom of the suitcase, not as a trophy, but as a marker, proof that I'd finished something I was never expected to start. 2 weeks later, I moved into a small place overlooking Riverton's east side. Hardwood floors, old windows, too much light in the mornings. I started work at a nonprofit focused on access to education, the kind of place I would have needed when I was younger. On my first day, a student asked me where I went to school. Northlake University, I said. Their eyes widened. That's impressive. I smiled, surprised by how natural it felt. A month later, my mom sent a message. We're proud of you. We always believed in you. I read it twice. Then I archived the conversation. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but because I finally understood something that had taken me years to accept. Belief that only appears after success isn't belief at all. I didn't need their approval to move forward. The story I tell now, to students, to colleagues, to anyone who feels invisible, isn't about proving people wrong. It's about surviving being underestimated and learning that your worth doesn't begin where someone else finally notices you. I wasn't the disappointment. I was just quiet. And that was enough to let me build something